Hello everyone, this is going to be part 2 of section 14 for History 231, and this is going to be the Punic Wars and Rome's expansion to the west. And we left off last time with our friend Hannibal having invaded the Italian peninsula, being an offensive guy. Best defense is a good offense, he believed, and so he's marched his army into Italy, and he's crushed the Romans in 2 consecutive major battles. And this is a serious problem. So what are the Romans going to do now? Hannibal is literally marching around Italy, just making life miserable for everyone. So what are they going to do? Well, they decide, okay, we got to do emergency action and say, appoint a dictator. Now, the Romans had a system where they wanted to make sure nobody had complete power. They always had power divided among people, but this is an emergency. So they put in this temporary dictator. And the temporary dictator comes in and he says, okay, clearly it's not working to go out and fight this guy, Hannibal with his army, in a major face-to-face battle. So here's what we ought to do. Guerrilla warfare. That's what we'll do. We'll do guerrilla warfare. We'll hassle him. We'll mess with his supply lines. We'll make his life miserable and get rid of him that way. Now, that's a good idea. This guy was a very clever guy. It's a very clever guy. There's only one problem with this. Roman culture is really big into big battles. They don't want to do guerrilla warfare. They want to fight the Carthaginians mano-a-mano, face-to-face. We'll show them how tough we are. So this guy's strategy works reasonably well for a while, but the Romans get impatient. Now, one of the things about life is patience is a virtue. It really will save you. And being able to plan ahead is a really, really good idea. So the Romans say, okay, after the 6 months is over, we don't like this guy. And they say, you're no longer a dictator, you're out. We're going to deal with Hannibal the old-fashioned way. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to assemble the biggest army you've ever seen. Our one big advantage is our ability to drop unlimited numbers of troops, or very nearly unlimited numbers of troops. We'll drop this massive, massive army, and we'll go out and just steamroller Hannibal. And he won't be able to stop us because there's so many of us. I don't care how talented he is, we're going to just rush over him and crush him. It's going to work honest. Well, that's what they decide to do. So they put together an absolutely massive army. This thing was absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. All right? How big was it? Here. They raised 8 legions of 5,000 men each, and together with their allies, 80,000 Roman soldiers marched north to a place called Apulia. All right? Apulia. And Hannibal, of course, is making trouble up there. And so the idea is, hey, we're just going to march up there and over steamroller them. Now, Hannibal knows they're coming. But you can't hide an army that big. So here come the Romans, marchy, and they march up there, and Hannibal is waiting for them. And here's where we see Hannibal's genius. At the Battle of Cannae, and I've given the Battle of Cannae a star, 216 BC, here's what happens. Hannibal creates his thin line here, but he doesn't line it up straight. Here comes this massive Roman army. It's marching this way, and Hannibal tells his guys, we're going to go in a bow. First, it's going to be a bow like this. Now, when the Romans reach these guys at the top, you guys start backing up. Don't run, just back up, and back up, and back up, and the Romans will keep coming, and they back up, and they back up, until the bow is inverted. And once the bow is inverted, the Roman army is going here, and then Hannibal starts to squeeze from the sides. Now, here's the thing. The Roman guys need a certain amount of room to swing their swords. You can't just swing swords if you're getting squeezed by the guys on either side of you. So the guys on either side get squished together, and then they're trying to fight like this. They can't swing their swords, and the Hannibal snaps the trap shut and absolutely annihilates this massive Roman army. Hannibal was outnumbered something like 3-1, and he completely annihilates this Roman army. It's one of the most staggering military victories, or defeats, depending on your point of view, in history. And the Battle of Cannae shattered the Roman army. Now, this is really pretty awful for the Romans. Good news for Hannibal, but it's bad for the Romans. They lost so many guys. They lost like 60,000 guys in one day. This was a catastrophe for them. And this is an interesting thing, because at this point, there is nothing standing between Hannibal and Rome. He could march his army straight to Rome and nothing could stop him. Nothing could possibly stop him. And it's always been a question, why didn't he? Because he doesn't do it. He does not pursue his advantage by attacking Rome directly. Now, the Romans thought he was. I mean, there are stories of people running around shrieking in the streets, and I'm pretty sure I would have been one of those people if this horrible catastrophe had happened, right? And here's the thing. There's stories of these guys just freaking out. Hannibal does not attack Rome directly. And in fact, people always wondered, why not? Why not? The best way to answer this question, right, the best way to answer this question is not to second-guess Hannibal. Historians ever since have said, oh gosh, Hannibal screwed up. He obviously wasn't as smart as we thought. Hannibal screwed up. He should have attacked Rome directly. He would have won the war. And if he takes Rome, of course, the war is over. So yeah, sure. Never second-guess a genius. All right, historians can take a look at this stuff. They're not military geniuses, and they'll sit there and say, oh, Hannibal screwed up. No, he didn't. All right. To give you a parallel to this, let's talk about our two friends, the Bushes, George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr., and Iraq. George Bush Sr. attacked Iraq. He attacked Saddam Hussein, and he defeated him in battle, in the open war, right? He got Kuwait freed from Iraqi control, and he did it by running his tanks all over southern Iraq. All right? And this is what he did, and the Americans were really good at this. Americans have incredibly good tanks and incredibly good tank crews, and they just totally crushed the Iraqis. Plus they had air power, all sorts of things, and people said, okay, well now we've defeated the Iraqi army, let's march first north to Baghdad and take over Baghdad, get rid of Saddam, and yeh-hooray, hurrah, everything will be fine. And George H.W. Bush, the senior George Bush, said, no, we're not going to do that. And after that, people said, what are you, a wimp? What are you, nuts? Of course you take advantage, you crush this guy, you send in the troops. But he didn't do it. And people second-guessed him for years, and they said, what an idiot. They were wrong. His son George Bush Jr., George W. Bush did send the troops into Baghdad. And we all know how that turned out. How long was the United States stuck in war in Iraq? How many of you probably know people who are veterans of that war? How did that turn out? As it turns out, it didn't turn out well, because American troops and tanks are great at fighting on the open field, because that's what they're trained to do. That's what they're equipped to do. They're not trained for urban warfare. Once you get into a city, the way war is fought completely changes. And Hannibal and George Bush Sr. both understood this, all right? They both understood this. When the Germans in World War II got into Stalingrad, they got bogged down in house-to-house fighting, and all their panzers and tanks were of no real value. And what happened to them? It was a turning point in World War II, and they lost badly. All right, totally destroyed. All right, so Hannibal realizes, if I invade Rome, I'm going to be fighting house-to-house, and I, unlike the Romans, cannot afford to lose my army. I need my army intact. And so therefore, he says no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep with the original plan. Ravage Italy, get Rome's allies to turn against them. Now there's another piece of the puzzle here which doesn't get a lot of attention, and that is our friend Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother. Hasdrubal took a reinforcing army, and he took them over the Alps just like Hannibal had done, and the Romans sent an army up to stop him. Now, the Romans here were not facing Hannibal, the genius. They were facing Hasdrubal, the really competent. Hasdrubal was a good general, but not a genius. So the Romans managed to defeat Hasdrubal as he gets into Italy and prevent him from linking up with his brother. Had Hasdrubal linked up with Hannibal, history would probably be very different today, because Hasdrubal and Hannibal's armies together would have been more than the Romans probably could have handled. That at least is my opinion looking back on it here. But the Romans stopped Hasdrubal. Now, meanwhile, while all this is going on, in Spain, the Romans and Carthaginians are beating the hell out of each other, smashing into each other, fighting battle after battle. Sometimes the Romans win, sometimes the Carthaginians win. It goes back and forth. But there's a fellow named Scipio, Publius Cornelius Scipio. You just gotta love these Roman names. Publius Cornelius Scipio, he says, hey man, we've got to take the battle to Carthage. And so he takes his troops, rather than going back and reinforcing Italy after Hannibal had annihilated the Romans in Italy, he says, no, what we're going to have to do is take the battle to Carthage. So he takes his troops and he sends them to Africa. And they go down to Africa and attack Carthage, and this forces Hannibal out of Italy. Nothing the Romans did against Hannibal directly was going to get him out of Italy, but if you attack Carthage, he has no real choice but to withdraw from Italy, and this is what he does. And he gets to Italy, and he and Publius Cornelius Scipio face off at the Battle of Zama. The Battle of Zama. And here, The Romans managed to turn some of Hannibal's troops against him, and Hannibal is defeated. It was a very close call, but Publius Cornelius Scipio defeats Hannibal. After that, Publius Cornelius Scipio got another nickname. We called him Scipio Africanus, and he became like the poster child for the great Roman hero, the greatest Roman general ever, blah, 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 blah. All right, and he was a very, very good general. He defeated Hannibal. You got to give the man credit for that. But part of it was that he managed to get some of Hannibal's army to turn against him at the last minute, and that, of course, did not go well for Hannibal. So Hannibal is defeated. Hannibal has to flee for his life. Remember, the Carthaginians can't afford to really lose a lot of battles. So once Hannibal loses this battle, he flees, and the Romans are hot on his tail, and the Romans were chasing after him. Eventually, he did have to commit suicide to avoid capture. And the Romans win the Second Punic War. So, yay, hooray, hurrah. Now, here's the thing. This was a near-death experience for Rome. This was so close. This could easily have gone the other way. Again, one or two battles going the other way, and who knows what would happen. What would have happened if Hasdrubal and Hannibal hooked up? I mean, who knows, right? We do know this. Roman nannies, a century later, were frightening small Roman children by calling forth the name Hannibal. He did a number on the Roman head like no one else in history. He terrified Rome like nothing else. So, now what? Rome defeats Carthage, crushes Carthage. It's the end of Carthage as a major power. Carthage has to pay war reparations, etc., 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 all that sort of thing. Carthage will never be a major power again. Carthage will never be a major power again. But what are you going to do now if you're Rome? And this raises a really interesting and important question here, all right? Because people talk about war as though it is a game, like it's a football game. Who wins the Super Bowl, right? Who wins the Super Bowl? Well, war is no game. War is serious. And one of the things about war is that sometimes the biggest danger of war doesn't come because you lose, although that is very, very bad. Sometimes the big danger comes because you win. And so the question we want to ask ourselves is, what effect did the Punic Wars have on the Romans? What things changed because of this? Well, what we know is after the Punic Wars are over, Rome goes kind of nuts. They go on a conquering spree. They start to conquer everything in sight, because as far as they're concerned, the only safe border for the Roman Republic is the one that is as far away as humanly possible from Rome. So you push the border as far away as humanly possible. So the Romans start conquering everything in sight. Now what this means is that the Romans are in a constant state of war, of invasion, of attacking everybody. And in fairly short order, the Romans are going to subdue Greece. They're going to get into Asia Minor. They're going to start crashing against the Greeks over there. The descendants of Alexander's generals are going to be fighting with them. And the Romans are going to expand into what we call the Hellenistic world. And this is going to start changing things. The other side of it was the Romans decided we need to conquer Spain, and they tried to do that. And that took them over a century of brutal fighting, because the Spaniards are not coming out and fighting them mano a mano. They're hitting with guerrilla warfare, little battles here, little battles there. The Romans have a heck of a time trying to conquer Spain. And literally it takes them more than a century to subdue the Iberian Peninsula. So the Romans are now in a constant war footing, a constant state of war here. And so the Romans start bumping off these Hellenistic kingdoms one after the other. First they go in and they make alliances with them, and then they start just taking over, and it's very, very, very messy. And I don't want to dwell on this, but suffice it to say it was messy. Right in the middle of this incredibly quick expansion the Romans start to make, they also decided, Carthage is still a threat, which is kind of silly, because Carthage was definitely not a threat at this point, but they decided Carthage was still a threat. So they attacked them in the Third Punic War and annihilated the city. I mean, just totally annihilated the city. The idea was, we'll never have trouble with Carthage again. The thing, of course, is that Carthage is like New Orleans. It's in one of those places that will always have a city. Geography, location, location, location. Carthage will be rebuilt as a Roman city. But Punic Carthage, the Carthage of the Phoenicians, is gone. and the top population is massacred and sold into slavery. It is brutal house-to-house fighting. It's a truly horrible thing. It's such a horrible thing that the Romans themselves were kind of ashamed of it, which I suppose they should have been, because they did commit some pretty awful human rights violations in doing what they did. But they destroy the city of Carthage. They start conquering all sorts of things in the Eastern Mediterranean, and this ends many of these Greek kingdoms, these descendants of Alexander the Great. These folks here. So this is going to be an interesting sort of thing. But the thing to keep in mind is this. Winning a war often brings great social changes. So let's think about, just for a moment, some of the social changes. Number one is a lot of veterans. All right. Now, one of the things that makes me crazy is when veterans do not get treated with respect and taken care of after their service. This is true in any society, including our own. It is imperative that veterans be taken care of. First of all, they have sacrificed a great deal for all of us. Second of all, they know how to kill you. So here's what starts to happen. Because all of the wealth starts flooding into Rome, pouring into Rome from these military victories, these conquests and things of that sort, and all of the Greek places are starting to become subjugated, you start seeing lots of wealth pour into Rome, pouring into Italy. Now, this wealth comes in a number of forms. First of all, just goodies, stuff, gold, wealth, and that sort of thing, but also slaves. The Romans loved slavery, and they enslaved enemy soldiers, they enslaved places where they would capture them, and that means lots of slaves start coming into Italy as well. Now, what is this going to do? This is going to disrupt the labor market. This is going to start disrupting the labor market. It also means, as is often the case in war, that the benefits of war, the wealth that comes from war, starts to pour into the hands of the rich, the patricians, the upper class. Now remember, Romans had a nice balance between plebeians and patricians. The plebeians got something, the patricians got something, and this sort of thing. This is going to start getting disrupted now. So, rich patricians start gobbling up smaller farms, start taking them away, not always legally. They start taking them away from poor Romans, and they start staffing them and farming them not with Romans, but with slaves. So you start having massive slave estates. Now what this does, of course, is it puts people out of work. So imagine for a moment that you are a Roman soldier, and you've gone off and you've fought for Rome, and you've had this huge career, and you've managed to survive somehow, and you get home from your career, and there's your wife, and she says, "Sorry, honey, your rich neighbor just took our house. We don't have a farm anymore. We got nothing." What are you going to do about that? Well, you can't go and kill the guy because he's got bodyguards and all that sort of thing, so you're kind of stuck there. You got kids, they're squawking, you got your wife, she needs to get fed, we need to get people eating. What are you going to do? You're going to go and move into the cities. And thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Roman soldiers, combat veterans, start moving into the city, particularly Rome. And when they get there, they settle in the slums, and they're miserable, nasty, awful places, and these guys are just eking out an existence. And these are veterans. These are the veterans who built Rome's entire current system. All right? They're the reason Rome is still here, and they're getting treated like this. And there's a lot of them. Now, here's the thing. If you've ever read John Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath, one of the things he talks about is one guy can be crushed. One guy can be isolated, be alone, and helpless. But you get two guys together. You get them talking to each other, and guess what? They become stronger than just two guys. So imagine this, a Roman veteran. You're a Roman veteran, you've come back from the wars, and here you are, all right? And you've lost all this stuff. Your rich neighbor took your stuff, and you're sitting there, and what are you going to do? You're going to go out and get drunk, all right? You're probably going to be drinking wine that is grown from grapes from your old farm. And you're sitting there, and lo and behold, there's this other guy, and he looks pretty depressed, so you start talking. And it turns out he's a veteran, too. Now, vets have this amazing ability to recognize each other. It's always struck me as rather uncanny. And you put two veterans in a room of 50 people, they'll find each other. It's really quite extraordinary. So these two veterans start to chat. They start to talk. And the guy says, "You know what? Things really suck. My rich neighbor took my farm." And the other veteran says, "Hey, man, that happened to me, too." Now you've got a problem, because each of those veterans might know more veterans, and pretty soon you've got a whole bunch of angry veterans who know how to kill you, and they've got a grudge. And what are they going to do? They're going to start getting organized, they're going to start getting together, and this is going to be a big problem. A second problem. Normally, earlier in Italy, farms would grow grain. That is what you eat. But there's not a lot of money to be made in growing grain. What you want is what's called a cash crop. A cash crop is a crop which you can make a lot of money with. Now today, the biggest cash crop in America, and it's one that I don't want any of you to start growing, it is still, as far as I know, illegal, but the biggest cash crop in America is marijuana because it's illegal. All right? But the other reason marijuana is a big cash crop is because it gets you high. And the fact is, people like things that get them high. It's one of the things about our species. I don't know why. I've been high. It was very unpleasant. I don't encourage anyone to get high. But anyway, by the way, when I got high, it was prescription stuff. It was totally legal, just in case you're wondering. But anyway, here's the thing, right? You want to make money on your farmland. You don't want to grow grain. That's not a high profit thing. You want to grow grapes, because grapes make wine. People get wine. They get drunk. They like it. All right, they'll pay for it. And so all these patricians who are confiscating all these small farms, absorbing them and staffing them with slave labor, are also not using them to grow grain anymore. They're using them to grow grapes and make wine, which means Rome is now having to import its food, much of it from Egypt. This is potentially a serious, serious problem here. Your food supply is now dependent on someplace outside of Rome. Right? And this is a very, very serious problem. This can get very, very much out of hand here. And in our current crisis, you can well imagine if this crisis happening, this coronavirus crisis was happening, and on top of that, you weren't sure there was going to be enough food, this could get really bad. Fortunately, the United States seems to have enough food, and we're not at least going to be starving to death in all of this. But the Romans have to import their food. They're dependent on Egypt in particular to bring food into the Italian peninsula while the slaves grow the grapes to make the wine. This is a big problem just waiting to happen. So now what we have is this. Because Rome won the Punic Wars, they've got themselves a long series of serious, serious social problems that are just getting bigger. And that means they're going to have to try and solve these problems. And the question is, are they going to be able to do it? And the result is going to be messy. So again, the lesson here is when you win, when things are going well, that is actually the time to be most concerned and careful. And the Romans are going to have to be most concerned and careful at this point in their history, and suffice it to say, it's going to get really, really messy. And so with that exciting cliffhanger, I'm going to move on from today's lecture, which again was lecture number 14. And the next time we'll talk about how Rome tries to solve some of the problems that come, again, not from its failures, but from its success. So in the meantime, be safe, be well, and I will see you all soon.